Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. We start our operation. My name is Olga Otomanova, and it's year 9 of the war and day 272 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor in our land. And I traditionally want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about this war. Our brief schedule for today is as follows. At 1400, we will have Vadim Denisenko joining us in this studio. He's the executive director of the Ukrainian Institute for the Future, and we will talk about the changes of the attitudes and narratives of the Russians after Kherson, the occupation, and about the winter campaign and what can Russia count on during this campaign. At 1500, Andriy Jemchenko will be joining us in this studio. He's the spokesperson for the State Border Guard Service, and we will talk about the situation in our borders. Joining us live right now is Volodymyr Kudrytskyi, the chairman of Ukrenergo National Energy Company, and we will talk about the energy front. Mr. Volodymyr, good afternoon. Let's start with the condition of our power grid, which constantly suffers damage by the Russians. Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. Last week, Ukrainian power grid suffered sixth massive missile attack, and that was the biggest one of all, the biggest one in Ukrainian history. More than 100 heavy missiles were launched at the Ukrainian power grid infrastructure, both generating stations and distributing substations. 15 installations, 15 facilities were damaged on that day. The level of damage varies, but as we know, in the substations of Ukrenergo, which are quite large facilities and technologically complex facilities, the equipment located there, it requires time to manufacture and replace. Fortunately, we had sufficient reserves available, both in terms of materials and equipment, and as soon as the air raid alert was cancelled on Tuesday, we started resuming and stabilizing the power supply to our consumers, to stabilize the system in a way to avoid any emergency situations, or at least to stabilize or avoid the possibility of such emergencies in future. After the attacks, I have to say that we almost don't have either thermal or hydraulic power plants which would not have suffered any damage. Almost all the hydraulic power generation and thermal power generation suffered missile strikes. Almost there is no undamaged substations for the transportation of power in all the grid. Unfortunately, any substantial significant substations suffered 5 or even up to 8 strikes. So the level of damage is colossal, and after every missile strikes, we need time to reconnect the majority of the consumers, to resume the power supply to them through the Ukrainian power grid, and we need 2 or 3 more days for those power shutdown schedules that we implement to stabilize the operation of the power grid, to make those power shutdowns less lengthy. And starting from Monday, the situation in the grid is stabilized, and the regular scheduled shutdowns are in place now, and these shutdowns are related to the fact of the deficit of the generation capacities In simple words, is the deficit of power generation in Ukraine. We cannot generate enough power for the consumers want to consume. In view of the fact that it's winter season, the consumption grows, and the schedules that we implement on a daily basis from morning till through the night, they are used to preserve balance in the power grid between the physical consumption and physical generation of electric power. It's important to have the system operate in a proper way, because otherwise we risk the power grid to collapse. Thus we implement these power shutdown schedules to have all the Ukrainians have lights, have proper power supply, and it's an important instrument in the current conditions of the power generation, so that the power grid operates in a stable way. So as I already mentioned, the power shutdowns are scheduled, and for example, we provided to the power distribution companies called Volodymyr. They are not part of Ukrenergo. Some people think that we manage them directly, but it's not so. They transport electric power from generation capacities directly to the consumers. So we provide them with the schedules with regard to what limitations should be put in terms of power consumption and power redistribution to the consumers. So their task is to have the lists of the consumers and to implement the power shutdowns so necessary to us to preserve the balance in the system in general. So the shutdowns again are rolling and scheduled, and in case all the redistribution facilities work properly and comply with the schedules, we will have properly stabilized power supplies. For example, if a dispatcher gives a command to shut down a substation with a supply of 100 gigawatt to stabilize the grid, so it's important to keep these shutdowns scheduled and to avoid any unscheduled shutdowns. Within the last week, there was a great job done in terms of renewal of the power transportation facilities. We mended a lot of damage. We expanded a lot of so-called bottlenecks, but there are still issues, for example, in Kherson region, and the difficulty there is in the low quality of transportation capacities, because while withdrawing from the region, the occupiers almost completely destroyed the power grid in the region and mined it on top of that. Now our repair technicians and repair technicians of relevant Volodymyr, along with deminers, they go along all the power lines so that deminers could demine it, and the civil energy technicians could have all these capacities repaired. So all the forces of our brigades are thrown to Kherson region to resume the power supply there. It's a very important issue, in my opinion. As to the forecast, tomorrow we will have some very short-term temperature drop, just like for half a day. And today we will know the limitations of power consumption for tomorrow. This information will be provided to Volodymyr's probably in the evening, as it usually happens as per the schedule, and later on we expect the temperature to stabilize or to grow a little bit even, which will result in a decrease in consumption of electric power, so it will be a little bit easier to stabilize the power grid. So my small remark that in case of absence of any new missile strikes, the situation will be stable and the rolling power shutdowns will go as per the schedule and will fall within our 4-hour standard that we as an industry adopted in this season. Thank you. We understand that we will have to live in these new realities, that we can expect more missile strikes, but all the Ukrainians are concerned with one question: what should we prepare for? And will this power shutdown schedules be in place during the whole winter? In response to your question, I would like to show you one slide. So here's the slide. So this is the level of damage of the power grid as of 15th of November. The geography of the strikes covers all the territory of Ukraine controlled by the Ukrainian government. In some places the damage is more intense, in some places it's less, but it's I would say a global thing for our power grid, and this is the picture we were surviving like already 6 times. What should we prepare for? In case there will be more massive missile strikes, respectively, we will first count on our armed forces and the air defense forces, which on a strike-to-strike basis they improve their capacity, their capabilities. They increase the number of missiles shut down, and the power technicians and the civilians work as the joint team upon these strikes, and with the joint effort we achieve the good result. We preserve the operation of the power system. Our army downs the missiles, the power technicians, they provide the prompt resumption of the power supply in different regions of Ukraine, specifically in those regions that are marked red in this map. On the 15th of November, it was important to reconnect them first. And the civilians showing their civil, so to say, conscience, they preserve the power after such attacks, which are lengthy, which go beyond the standard 4 hours shutdown. So this is what we have to be prepared for. We have to be prepared for some extended power shutdowns, more than 4 hours. In some cases, after the last attack, it was almost 24 hours in certain regions. So in that case, I hope that our citizens already know what to do. You have to have a reserve of water. You have to have your power banks charged. You need to be able to get heat in your dwelling, like warm clothing and other things that would allow you to comfortably go through such strikes. Mr. Volodymyr, do we have enough reserves? I mean, in terms of equipment and mechanism to fulfill the repairing works. There were talks of power Rammstein recently, and do we have the power? Do we have the support coming from our Western allies? You know, before the invasion, we created one of the biggest reserves of equipment and materials in the world, specifically specifically the most complex equipment. I mean, automatic transformers, which transform the voltage from high to low, which helps redistribute the power through the grid, for example, from the nuclear power plant to the final consumer. And now, when we talk to our partners about support, when we ask them to find some additional equipment that we can use for replacement of the damaged ones, we see that nobody had the type of equipment that we have, and it's a complex equipment that takes a lot of time to manufacture, and we keep using it for reestablishment of power supply through the whole grid. But we continue looking for such equipment throughout the world, and we try to have it delivered to Ukraine. The support, the aid is on the way. It started coming from March, and after the occupation of our first regions in the northern region, I mean Kyiv region, Sumy region, Kharkiv region, and Chernihiv region, back in April, we received a lot of material resources from our European colleagues, from European power companies, which enabled us to renew the grid in the occupied areas. Now the level of damage is way higher, and now we are looking for bigger amounts of equipment, not only for aerial lines, but mostly for substations. I would say mostly for the substations. Dear colleagues, your questions, please introduce yourself. Volodymyr Kolbyany, International Agency Bloomberg. I would like to continue the subject of the transformers. Can you please tell us which countries are the main manufacturers of such transformer equipment? Do we have any friendly countries, friendly to us, where we can order these power transformers or enter into some agreements to procure them? It's Spain, Belgium, South Korea, India, obviously China, Ukraine. So these are the countries which have sufficient manufacturing capacities for automatic transformers, and we need to understand that the class of voltage used in Ukraine is specific for the countries of former USSR. It does not match with the level of voltage used by the European countries. You know, it's like the railway. There is a broad railway and a narrow railway. In the same way, the class of voltage we use in our grid is 750 and 330, and in Europe it's 220, and the task is not to only find the powerful transformer, but it should match the class of voltage for our grid, so we could reinstall it and switch it on so it works properly. That's why we are looking almost in all of those countries that I just mentioned. There is a manufacturing there are manufacturing enterprises in Japan also, and we look throughout the world independently of the level of friendliness of the country towards Ukraine. We have another question, please.
Jensen from Danish Broadcasting Corporation. So we've heard over the past few days calls for Ukrainians to temporarily leave the country, maybe 3 or 4 months if necessary, to not put too much strain on the energy system. In your opinion, what do you think of that assessment?
Ну, наприклад, наша компанія ніколи не закликала українців евакуювати.
Well, our company never called Ukrainians to leave the country, and we see the role of energy sector specifically in provision of such level of comfort, such level of functioning of the power grid to have the Ukrainians stay in the country and spend the winter here. Our daily battle is specifically in that, to have the power grid satisfy the needs of Ukrainians in power supply. We have scheduled power shutdowns, and we try to make them more comfortable for the consumers, so that the consumer knows when the power is being shut down to plan their days, but the calls to mass exodus of Ukrainians abroad is irrelevant.
Michael Washura, Newsweek magazine. If we take October 10, or better, October 9 as our baseline for the health of the energy grid, the health of the energy production system, and also the strategic reserves of equipment like transformers, October 9 is 100%. What percent are we at today?
Хороше питання, відповідь на яке, на жаль, може...
It's a good question, and the reply to this question may better orient our enemy regarding the resource that remained in our system. So we have to look separately at the generating capacities, our reserves, and substations. So I will keep it secret about our reserves, and we have to keep it secret still to increase our resilience, our capacity to resist. As to the generation, we almost don't have undamaged hydraulic and thermal power plants. So all the whole park of generation, apart from the 3 nuclear power plants located in the territory controlled by Ukrainian government, all other power plants were damaged. The major power plants, starting from the 10th of October until now. It influenced in a very significant way on the capacity of the generation capacities, not to the zero, but it restricted it to a certain extent. Before October 9, we lost very important power generating capacities. First of all, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which can generate 6 million megawatts of power. And until a certain time, before the autumn, it still kept generating power for Ukrainian grid. We also lost a number of important hydraulic power plant in Luhansk, Kakhovka hydraulic power plant, Luhansk thermal power plant, and also Zaporizhzhia thermal power plant, which is located in Energodar near the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So before October 9, we lost about 8,000 megawatts of available generating capacities, and apart from that, we lost the capacity to generate power due to the strikes on every power plant which is located in the controlled territory. I mean, non-nuclear power plants. I will not name the percent, but the damage is global. In terms of networks, it's difficult to name any not substation which would not have been damaged. We have online questions. Ruslana Chichulina, Ukrainian Energy. How could you comment on the level of damage which is bigger on the western part of Ukraine? It's I think the thing is the Russian strategy of the strikes. So they try to use the strategy of making the maximum damage within one strike, inflicting maximum damage within one strike. So they've chosen the substations and the generation capacities in the western region. So during other attacks that may be other important power generating regions, so to say, you know that back in the beginning of September, Kharkiv suffered very significant attack on their power infrastructure. Kyiv suffered significant loss, but geography is quite expanded. Volodymyr and Ukrenergo, in view of the situation, there are talks about the possible blackout in case of new missile strikes, and as some people say it will not happen and Ukrainians don't have to leave. Can you please explain what is the What is the probability of blackout and what should Ukrainians be prepared for in this context? The probability of blackout depends on the nature and the scale of damage inflicted on the power grid during certain missile attack. It depends on a number of factors. For example, how our air defense worked. Like last time, they worked excellently. Which facilities were eventually hit by rockets? What's the level of damage? Because a missile can hit a substation and completely deprive it of any capacity. And where exactly and what is the combination of these strikes? Also, a lot depends on the condition of the power grid during the moment of the strike. For example, what was the level of consumption in the grid during the strike? Obviously, we don't publish the hourly schedule of consumption, not to have the enemy orient of the on the levels of consumption in the system. So it's difficult to forecast the blackout. It depends on whether the massive missile strikes will continue and how successful they might be and how they can hit some sensitive points in our power grid. I recently said that blackout is not the end of the world. It's a substantial shutdown of the power grid, after which immediate resumption of its operation begins. And in Ukrenergo and other power supply companies, we prepare for the worst case scenarios. We had specific trainings in place. Even in case this happens, everybody knows who needs to do what to promptly resume the operation of our power grid. It's not only about power supply, but such trainings were also implemented in the other operators of critical infrastructure like gas supply and water supply, and on the level of local administrations and local governments. Everybody knows what to do just in case such situation happens. But I have to emphasize that it's not a fact that we should expect for blackout ahead, because the Ukrainian power grid, which withstood the most recent attack, it demonstrated its resilience for not the first time, and it depends to a larger extent on the capabilities of our air defense. More questions?
National Public Radio. So far, it seems you've been able to share the blackouts, 4 hours here, 4 hours there. Is there a risk, though, that one area could be completely knocked out, that the Kyiv area could suffer a blackout for days at a time while there might still be power in the West, or vice versa? Is that becoming more difficult to maintain?
Дизайн енергетичної системи передбачає
The design of the power grid is envisaging the connection of different parts between themselves. So if any substation or transportation lines gets damaged, we have to have the alternative way of reconnecting the consumer to the power grid. For example, we can compare it with the roads. If there is a highway used between two large cities, if something happens to that highway, the movement is obstacled, so people can use some secondary roads to find their way around the obstacle from one place to another. So it's, in simple words, this is something that happens in the power grid due to the network nature, the connection of different elements between themselves, between each other. We manage within like hours to reconnect almost all the regions which end up without power after a massive missile strike. And I will repeat myself, we have some specific situation, for example, in Kherson region, but it was purposefully mined and blown up. I mean the whole infrastructure, and we just need time just to demine it. And apart from that, I don't think that this scenario is possible when one region is shut down, meanwhile others are have normal power supply. Any more questions, friends? If you allow me another question, I understand that it may not be addressed with you, but I think that you may have this information. We understand that now many diesel generators are being procured and they require fuel. Is there any emergency reserve of fuel created for such case of mass blackout? So Ukraine has enough diesel to maintain these generators? Well, I can share the Ukrenergo experience. Yes, we create the fuel reserve just like any operator of the critical infrastructure. We really don't have problems with procuring fuel for our autonomous power sources. I think that it should be enough. Mr. Volodymyr, as to the occupied territories, you mentioned Kherson, so what are your plans for re-establishing power supply there? Our plans is to reconnect at least one line of power supply, which may provide the power to the whole region. And the biggest challenge is obviously the level, the number of mines in the territory. So for your understanding, there are regions where 1 square meter requires hours to demine. So there are large brigades of deminers and power technicians who follow them step by step, and they keep working incessantly. And where we see any damage which can be repaired, such repair works are already begun, and where the territory is still mined, together with the emergency service, we just wait for the access to the aerial lines or to other power lines. In principle, we are ready to provide as much repair brigades as can be admitted to the demined areas. As to the deoccupied Kharkiv and Donetsk region, were you able to resume the operation in full in those areas? We resumed the operation of the distribution networks. It's not like 100% reliable layout, but why we talk about redistribution? Because in the occupied territory of Kharkiv region, it has one significant substation which is connected through the territory, which still requires demining to resume the full operation, resume the full resupply. But the situation in Kharkiv region is better than in Kherson because it's been more time since the liberation. I want to thank you for joining us. Dear colleagues, I will remind you, we had Volodymyr Kudrytskyi with us, the chairman of Ukrenergo. Let's work together for our victory, and glory to Ukraine. Dear colleagues, our next briefing is at 1400, so bear with us.